session?
Well, there's one priority I've had for a couple sessions now, and that is to finally expand Medicaid in Texas, overcome the silly ideological inertia that has stopped Texas from taking this step. Good for business, good for people. That's one of them. Another one is to finally invest in some of our neglected infrastructure. I'm talking about highways, I'm talking about schools, I'm talking about healthcare, because infrastructure is both social and physical. And finally, I really think it's important that we push back on the expansion of government into businesses, into our bodies, into our brains, into boardrooms and bedrooms. We really risk running into a government that scares away the talent that we want to come here in Texas. I want to stop that movement right where it is. First thing we got to do is recognize that COVID was very damaging to public education. It was a Herculean effort by the school districts to implement virtual learning. It was much better than nothing, but really kids suffered a lot. It is going to take investments in terms of paying teachers more, incentivizing to be there. They're going to need more resources. We're going to need alternative ways to catch kids up. Another thing that we need to do is make sure that kids are in a good headspace when they're in school. I'm talking about social and emotional learning, because that leads to better academic outcomes, better performance as adults, and fewer kids who become homicidal later in life. This is really important to Texas. One of the things we learned from the pandemic is that neglecting our infrastructure leaves us vulnerable. And when it comes to healthcare, we really were not ready for the pandemic. It would have been impossible to be totally ready, but we weren't close to ready. We've got to have solid, functioning systems with adequate employees who are adequately compensated, and functioning computer systems, and functioning databases, and interactive interoperability systems so that information can be exchanged between hospitals and the state, so that when trouble hits, we're able to handle it. We also need to make sure that everybody in this state has access to health care. Generally, that means health insurance. Insurance is not care, but it's prerequisite. And we have a huge problem with that in Texas. We got 5 million people who are uninsured. We can cover 1 million of them with the fiscally beneficial move. It's called Medicaid expansion. We have a number of economic tools in place in Texas, and they generally function pretty well. I think we need to make sure that they're not taken advantage of by businesses who aren't really needing them to be here, but make sure they are there and they are available to bring businesses here so that we can grow our economic base here in Texas. At the same time, one of the things I hear most often from established businesses here in Texas, small and big, is that we need to make sure this state is a place where people want to live. And that means that young people want to work here, young people want to stay here, that policies don't drive employees away, and that we have good sidewalks, good roads, good schools, good healthcare systems. All of that is part of business. Incentive systems, good regulatory environment, good tax environment, but also the kind of climate where people want to live. All those things work together to help our businesses grow. Texas has a very, very friendly regulatory environment and a tax environment for businesses. It would be the wrong thing to get a bunch of cumbersome regulations in place that strangle businesses. Other states do that. We don't. We have a good tax environment for businesses. But there's not much further we can go in those two areas, so what we need to do is make sure that businesses have access to infrastructure, that they have access to a workforce, that they have access to their state and local officials. Those are the areas where I think we really need to do some work to make sure that businesses can thrive in Texas. The legislature has underinvested in public infrastructure. We are billions short every year in just maintaining the infrastructure that's already been built, not even taking into account the roughly 1,000 people a day that are moving to Texas, the additional businesses that are coming to Texas, the goods that we ship in and that we ship out from Texas. So we're going to need to invest, not spend, but invest more dollars in our transportation infrastructure. At the same time, building roads, building freeways works best when it's done in complement with other systems of transportation, whether it be mass transit or multimodal sources at airports, seaports, rail, those kinds of things all have to be figured in complement along with intelligent urban planning and state cooperation with local governments so that those urban planning objectives can be carried out. The state water plan is not sufficient for the future, which isn't to say that people haven't done good work on it already. It's just time to move up. Our old ways of doing things, building reservoirs, tapping into wells, tapping into rivers, it worked when we were a smaller state. We're a bigger state now. We have industrial processes that rely on water. We have residents that rely on water. And we have a changing climate. That means longer, harder, worse droughts, and it means heavier flooding. That's very damaging. What we need to be able to do is capture the water that comes down in the force of floods rather than have it devastate our crops and our livestock and our businesses and our roads and our schools. And at the same time, we need to plan long-term for additional water resources. That may mean connections to adequate water supply in other parts of the state, and it may mean recharging aquifers where possible. Those are going to be some major investments. It's going to require ground-up cooperation with regional water districts, and the state has a great framework to make all of that work. We just need to make sure that it actually does happen. Our grid is improved. We're way better off than we were. We did some good work in the legislative session last time. I was involved in that, and I plan to continue to be involved in it as we make further improvements. What we need to do right now is make sure that we are able to preserve our existing generation capacity while simultaneously incentivizing new generation capacity. We need to be careful to make sure that we don't dictate exactly what happens. We want markets to take care of that, which means that we're going to have the proper market incentives. It could be gas-fired generation, it could be batteries, it could be hydrogen, it could be a combination of all of them. We need to avail ourselves of the benefits that renewable resources have brought to Texas, many gigawatts of electricity supporting industry throughout the state, while at the same time recognizing the importance of the fossil fuel industry and ways to develop clean ways of utilizing those resources at the same time.